Hey everybody, welcome back to the new video on this channel, and today we look again into the Nuxt DevTools and see what this Nuxt app and our Nuxt app can do for us. Here we go. Yes, you heard correctly, we once again dive into Nuxt DevTools, and after last week's part 1, some of you were interested in another part 2 diving into leftover panels, and that's what we'll do right away with our lovely demo application Elk. But before we start to take a look at the respective panels, we want to have a look at the DevTools ourselves. So if we open this here, we have once again this lovely screen. And if we now open our console here and have a look at what's actually happening for the Nuxt DevTools, then we will see, if we take this and go out a bit further in our lovely DOM tree, we see this is just an iframe, right? Here, this Nuxt DevTools iframe, and that links to Nuxt DevTools client render tree. So here, if we open that URL separately, we actually see the Nuxt DevTools themselves. Of course, nothing will happen now because there's no app that they're hosted in, but this itself is a web application. And it's not just any web application. Actually, as I mentioned in the intro, it is a Nuxt application. And that is more obvious if we take a look at the Nuxt DevTool package. That's obviously open source. So we take a look at packages, it's a little monorepo, DevTools directly in here, and then we jump into the client part because of course it's a module, right? And the module is then establishing that client that we've seen before and loaded through the iframe. And here we see it's actually true. It is a Nuxt config that loads certain things like Shiki and a lot of other parts, some Nuxt modules as well. So we see it is indeed a Nuxt application in our Nuxt application. Mind-blowing, right? Some kind of inception, but we'll go one more level of inception today, I promise you. But now let's jump into the respective panels and have a look at what they're doing. And to take a look at the next panel, we could just click down here on the timeline section, right? Or that icon. But instead, what we want to do, that's another cool feature that I want to show you, is we push Command K or Control K, depending on which system you are, right? And this opens the wonderful command palette. So here we could just type timeline, for example, and will bring us to the timeline panel. Or we could say, I don't know, info or inspect, whatever, and we would jump to that specific panel. So if you ever want to quickly jump somewhere and you don't see the specific icon because it's maybe here in that menu because it's not big enough, or just want to jump to the settings, you can just push Command K or Control K and then jump into here. That's also something you used to from other sites, and that also works in the DevTools. That's also a neat little hack for productivity that if you know, you can just do a lot with a few more shortcuts. But now back to the timeline panel. And it already says that we have to enable the actual timeline section here. And the idea is to have some kind of timeline for when composables are being executed, for when route change is happening. So we can enable that, and that will basically insert something into our Nuxt config here. So we see this change here, timeline enable true, and we'll do this. This is all magically happening under the hood thanks to the Nuxt DevTools. So basically they are connected with your application. They will update the Nuxt config for you. Same with installing a module, then there's a restart, and we're back here. Now that the Nuxt config is changed, we can start tracking here right away, but be aware that this probably will not work for every application. This is quite an experimental feature still, and the idea is that in the timeline, no matter which view you take, the list view or the graph view, you will see that the routes navigation is happening, but also when your composables are called. And depending on how you import things, how things are used, this might or might not work yet. So let's get started and try it out. We first click on start tracking here, and then we'll get going. We can switch the view, for example, from the list view or the timeline view. It doesn't matter much. And now if we go to notifications, we should see here already, okay, we have notifications, then use state is called. We have some ripple calls here, and we could even see from where they're coming. Of course, now the stack trace is a bit large, so that might be a bit more difficult to see, but at least we have the option to take a look. And if we would now go back to, let's say, home, for example, then we would also see, no matter which list it is, where things are triggered. For example, here we have the notification call, and then home, we see, okay, that's called here as well. Here we have a better list of when what was called. So for example, use state column mode was accessed quite often here, but that's kind of it. That's because also we are in that mocked service here, right? If we, for example, take a look at our Nuxt profile once again, we'll search for Nuxt here, click on Nuxt at webtool.ls, then we could have another look and see, okay, yeah, we navigated, we have another use state call. Once again, this is more helpful if you have actual composables that are executed besides use state, of course. Then you can see also how long they took, how they were in terms of parent to child communication, and what waterfalls are being caused. As said, it's still a bit experimental. It doesn't 100% work everywhere, but if there's some issues, make sure to file a bug report. All right, and now we jump into a very interesting part, this extra layer here, these 13 extra ones. So we start with the top one here, Open Graph. And this is especially useful if you have a public-facing website, because then you'll see, okay, which tags are used, which meta tags, so like the title, for example, the theme color, language, and so on. We also see which might miss which tags. So for example, here we see the description is missing, the icon, and also OG information. Then we could have some previews here, how Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Telegram would preview roughly our URL. Now that the image is missing, that's a bit unfortunate. The good part here is though, we can get a code snippet straight away to say, okay, this is what we can put into our page, and it will automatically insert the right things. Now, of course, we have to fill in things like description, OG title ourselves, but it's very easy to just get started here. And the Open Graph tab is, as I said, especially useful if you have a public page and you're not aware which tags you might all need, if you just take a look at it while developing. So that's definitely a good start. In general, all the extras from nuxtseo.com, so all the modules from core team member Harlan, are also highly recommended in addition to that. All right, but from the Open Graph panel, we go back to two new panels. So we take a look at them together. And these are right under the top bar here. The first one is the storage panel. So here we see the storages that are actually attached to your Nuxt application. And as Nuxt is based on Nitro and thus also on storage, they are listed here. And there are a few caveats though. There are two open GitHub issues that are reducing the experience a tiny bit at the time of recording. The first one is actually one that I raised myself, and I realized that actually the cache entry of Nitro's built-in cache is not really available in the DevTools. That would be super helpful to see what is cached by Nitro and how, so I hope that will be fixed in the future. I mean, ideally I just have time to look into it myself, so fingers crossed for that. Otherwise, contributions are always welcome, especially also for the next issue, which is, well, that programmatically added storage mounts are also missing in the storage itself, because the storages are just statically added here in the server RPC part. And that's a bit tricky. That's also why we don't have the actual ELK storage down here, because these are all mounted dynamically depending on the driver and not set statically. That's also why we have this new test storage here, and we can take a look at it, because right now it's empty. We can search for keys, we can do other things, but they are empty at the moment. And we want to change that. So what we can do is, well, we take a look at the second panel here, server routes. And this will list all the Nitro server routes or API routes that are available in their API. We have some runtime stuff from Nuxt Security, from ITN, so some module routes as well. And then here I added a custom route called add to storage, and we can send a query. We can change from get to post or put or patch. We can send all kind of requests here. This is our own little API client to Nitro. So what I can do is I can just send it as is. And ideally, if things go well, at 200, so that's great. The request finished in, well, 2 seconds. That took a bit longer than expected. And here just returns me the keys that are now in the storage. That's how I set it up. But it also did another thing, because before there was nothing in there, right? So let's take a look at our storage panel again. And here in the test, we see now we have a last request key here, and the value is that one, which is the timestamp of when we just did that here. So with these two panels, you have all the power to actually try out your Nitro API routes as you like. You also see that there are the other ones where like, okay, let's list all the servers. We can send a request and it will just be empty, because this is of course the mocked version of ELK. So no Mastodon servers are included here. And we also have, of course, a login, etc. route where we, of course, should also pass in the argument here. Otherwise, well, that will not go well. First of all, the get method is not allowed. And even if we send a post like this, then it would probably also just reject us because there is no server. Or in this case, it will just even give us a 500, which shouldn't happen. But we don't call this API like that anyway. So that's kind of okay here in this case. And yeah, these two panels are super helpful if you have API routes, if you want to see what's going on in your storage. And I'm looking forward also to the few improvements in the GitHub issues being closed. Also link to them in the description if you're interested when you're watching that, if it's still an issue or not. And if you have anything else, also link to the DevTools repo in the description as usual. All right, and now we go into a panel that is so interesting. We have to get into that. So now we have this icon. You all know it. It is the VS Code icon. And here it first of all will say, oh yeah, you need to install VS Code Server. And if you don't have VS Code Server installed, then too bad. You can't do much here. So we'll quickly do that. There is also a guide attached, so we can have a look at that and do it real quick. But installing is pretty simple. But this is necessary because otherwise it won't work. And now you might wonder, wait. VS Code Server, is this still a thing? Don't we use tunnels? Yeah, actually, yes. So there's the VS Code Server by Microsoft that's deprecated right now, but some people still use it. There are, of course, VS Code tunnels. There is also a VS Code Server that's community maintained. So you have a couple of options on local serve versus tunnels versus the CLI. There really are a few options there. I would just go for whatever is default and what works. Unfortunately, on my WSL system, the VS Code CLI needs to be manually downloaded. There's a quite a process there. So I will show that real quick on my MacBook for you to see how it works, because there it's frictionless. What a surprise. If you have any struggle with that, let me know in the description. So there are some people said like, oh yeah, especially with the WSL component in there to use WSL instead of plain Windows, there are some problems, but this is regarding the whole VS Code CLI, so not specific to that extension. Nevertheless, let's take a look what's going on there. All right, same application, same port, same code, just different operating system and different device. And what we click here is just launch VS Code here. We'll install the VS Code Server under the hood, and boom, we see our VS Code in light mode, but still available. And this is the actual Elk workspace. And to show that, we'll do one thing in a second. We can install some extensions. We decide not to here. We can also switch to dark mode if we want to, but we just go ahead here and show that these things work. And what we can do is even use our command. And what we can do is we can even use our command pipeline here. So we could technically also say, okay, let's toggle between light and dark mode. It works. So next what we want to do is we want to open a certain file. Let's see which one we actually want to open. The best part is we can have a look through the inspector. Here we have nav.title.view, for example. So we can go and open that in our VS Code, which will open that not in the DevTools VS Code, unfortunately, but still it's good that we know that we now have to go to nav.title.view. And in here, of course, it's a bit small, I know, but it will work out for this case. Let me make it maybe a bit bigger, remove the chat window here. That works. And this part, and we're good to go. Here we have the name. So we have a button, and we also have the app name here. And instead here we say, hey, YouTube, for example. We save this and it's updated over here to the left. So we can easily say, hello, folks. And it just works. You can edit your application through VS Code mounted in the Nuxt DevTools, which is the Nuxt application in your Nuxt application. And no matter if you would actually do this, or this is just a nice gimmick for demos, showcasing, etc., it is amazing that it's possible. It's crazy that the Nuxt application inside your Nuxt application, so the DevTools can communicate with VS Code through the VS Code server. And that also means that sky is the limit in terms of extensibility, because you can also build a Nuxt DevTools extension easily as a Nuxt module too. And a lot of Nuxt modules actually come with extensions, like Pinia, for example, as you've seen. So maybe take a look at that. And if you're interested in how to build one, write in the comments. Maybe you can talk about that next or in the future at some point, if you all want to know about it. But now let's go back to the other panel. Okay, and after we are back here on the Windows machine, we'll take a look at the next panel, which is the View Use panel. And you might not have that straight away, because obviously if you don't use View Use, you don't have it. But to be real, you probably do, because, well, View Use is such a great library. You should definitely do that and replace some of your custom functionality with something that's battle tested and does the same job, maybe even better, right? And in here, what you basically have is documentation of the View Use things. So you can just look it up. That's quite convenient as well. It's not doing much more than that, but that's already a great start. So also here, a great example of how you can maybe include some of your own developer documentation or some readmes or whatever in the DevTools and make use of it. And from there to next tab is also a module, CSS. So if you use CSS, then you will also have this tab and you will see the source, you will see the analyzer. So which colors, for example, are used, which icon sets, you see the components and how they actually are transferred. So which CSS comes out eventually because of the classes used. You can prettify that and take a look at, you have the rules that are matched. So it's a very thorough analyzer and it's quite helpful to see what's actually happening under the hood. And then yet another panel, the view macros panel. That's basically just saying that view macros is working. So if you want to install that, maybe you still use things like reactivity transform. If you have never heard of it, also talked about it in the past, then that's great. Other than that, it's not doing much at the moment, and that's also okay. But the next panel is actually quite interesting, the Vitest panel, because you can actually run your tests along with Nuxt, so to run them on the same time and also see the results. So we can click start Vitest here. The thing is right here, things are dark at the moment because, well, it first of all asks you, hey, look, do you have a Vitest UI installed? And I said, no, I don't have. Then we'll ask if you want to install it. So let's quickly add it because it is not part of the Elk repository right now, and see if we can get the tests running with it or not. And here we go. We have now Vitest UI running in the Nuxt DevTools. We see some tests are failing and a lot of them are passing. We can run them again, but we also see the unit tests work. This doesn't support browser mode, so okay, Windows not defined. It kind of makes sense. It also shouldn't run in the right environment, but all the unit tests are working. If they wouldn't work, we would see that straight away. So once again, another helpful part here to run Vitest, the UI straight away in your Nuxt DevTools. If, of course, you have tests, but come on, you really should by now, right? I also talked a lot about testing with Nuxt, so have a look at the video, also link in the description if I don't forget it. Then we have 5 more panels, so let's go through them. We have one panel, that's the debug panel here. This gives you basically a wonderful log for debugging, but of course it only works if you set debug to true in your Nuxt config. So in this case, we'll just set it to true and then we'll run the whole thing. So now after Nuxt restarted, we see actually what happens with the Nuxt modules and how they mutate the Nuxt options. So here we see, for example, Pina added itself to be excluded from optimizing dependencies. We have the unplugin view macros Volar plugin added to the view compiler options plugins here. We have some view includes. We have a lot of different settings here that come from the modules and how they are actually changed. And we see a lot of dependencies to be excluded or added. So this is super helpful to see what your modules are actually doing with your options. You can say, okay, let's add also all the built-in modules. You can check templates, for example, to see which templates are added, what is transpiled and what not. We can see the plugins and also the empty initial option here as well. So this needs the debug true flag in your Nuxt config, and then you just have to do a hard reload. Then you see all the interesting info. So this can also help just to get an overview what module is doing what here exactly. Really, really helpful. So from the debug panel, we jump into the hooks panel. And here we see all the client hooks, the server hooks, and of course the built-in hooks by Nuxt here. See what is called, how long is it being used, what is being listened to as well. And that can also help to debug, for example, oh yeah, build done hook took a while. Kind of makes sense that like, okay, when you're done with the build, then please, I don't know, add certain files or check things. So we see where things are rather slow and how we can optimize our hook calling here. Now, this already gives some kind of indicator what could be a slower part, at least regarding to the hooks or not. And it's worth to take a look also here that numbers are at least reasonable or not. All right, and the third of the 5 panel, virtual files, also can be really, really helpful to take a look which virtual files Nuxt and Vite create here. For example, also which component DTS files are created for all the auto-imported components, for example. Then we see the router options here being generated, which can be really helpful to see which routes are actually being used. And though we have, for example, here an own router options JS is just imported, so that's not really helpful in this case, but in others it might be. We have type declarations. We have a lot of different things that come. Also plugins, for example, here from CSS just to add the CSS directly, etc., etc. So here the built-in magic from Nuxt happens, so to say, and everything that's not really surfaced through DevTools or your logs or similar can be seen here. It helps to just take a look around because then you might find a gem or two, but it's also quite in-depth. So might be interesting, but you can also say like, okay, you don't have to open that at all, ever. All right, the second to last panel is actually the Nuxt options viewer. This is super helpful to see which Nuxt options are actually set. You can even have a discover option here to enter a query to say, okay, I want to know Nitro or something, and then it's shown. Keep in mind that also things like license keys for Nuxt UI Pro which is free now, so it doesn't matter, but still other license keys and variables, etc. are also visible. So I won't show you much here because it could contain sensible data. Don't want to show you these. Not all my Stripe private API keys, right? That's not for the video. Nevertheless, this is quite helpful to debug and see what options are being set. And the last panel is actually the inspect panel. So this is from Vite plugin inspect. You have the option to switch between client and SSR. Of course, for SSR, you have to refresh the page. Kind of makes sense. And then we see how things are being transferred over. So what actual plugins are being used to, for example, transform imports or change names. So if we make this a bit bigger here, we see, oh yeah, okay, import cache account from _Nuxt composables cache TS. This is updated and added. We see what each of the plugins does. So here the import transform from Nuxt. We have also, well, a Vite plugin view tracer, just to give a tracer position. It's only in dev, of course. We have a transformation here from the view single file component over to a non-single file component, etc., etc. So you can take a look at each of the components and see step by step what's happening. It's loaded. Then we have the transformation. The view tracer is added. Then we actually have here down there from component name plugin a name assigned for that component. If it's not assigned by default, which is not, then the loader. So we actually replace the resolve component, by the way, to import a component here and eventually some import analysis. So also they're really helpful to see how view components are actually in also all the other files, JavaScript files, TypeScript files, etc., how they are processed. So if you would wonder what certain plugins do with your files, that's one of your solutions. But a lot of these will also be part of the new Vite DevTools in the future, so stay tuned for that. That's almost everything for Nuxt DevTools. There's just one more panel we want to have a look at, and that's the settings panel. And to be fair, there's not too much to say there. It's important though that you can customize things. You can say, okay, let's expand the sidebar, have names in there, let's make it scrollable, so you can actually scroll through the whole thing if you want to and don't have this weird extra option. You can remove things. There are also panels we haven't seen, like terminals, because there was no terminal going on, or errors, and it is extremely helpful to make this to your liking and customize it to your needs. Of course, you can also switch between light and dark mode. That's the most important feature here. Not, but you get me there. Make sure to customize things, to try things out. Now I want to know from you out there, what is your favorite Nuxt DevTools feature, and is there anything else that you're interested in? If yes, write it in the comments. If no, think again and then write it in the comments. Jokes aside, see you around on the other videos here on this channel. I hope you like this mini series about the Nuxt DevTools, and see you every Friday, even though the video comes out a bit later, but every Friday for a new video. And other than that, have a lovely time and happy hacking.